Well, and the other part of this paragraph that I just have to laugh at is that Pierre works too hard. He should take a vacation. What, so he could be like our prime minister who spends almost half his time vacationing and not, working for Canadians? At 4 o'clock in the morning, approximately 10 hours prior to the announcement that Randy Boissonnault had been kicked out of cabinet, the CBC dropped another hit piece on Pierre and the Conservatives. It's almost as if they knew that the Randy Boissonnault announcement was going to happen and had this article at the ready. It's also interesting that Justin Trudeau arrived in Ottawa just hours before the article dropped. Regardless of the circumstances, we don't tolerate disinformation from the Liberal bought and paid for CBC. So it's time for us to set the record straight. Again.
Let's take a look. So this is the article that dropped, and it's interesting that multiple Liberals were actually referencing this in their statements leading up to question period.
How about that?
The article is entitled, Poilievre's office maintains tight control over what Conservative MPs say and do. Party staffers monitor caucus for signs of message indiscipline and fraternization with other MPs.
After 2 years of Pierre Poilievre as their leader, many Conservative MPs say they are much less free now than they were before his arrival. The man who promised during his leadership run to make Canada, quote, the freest country in the world, end quote, maintains tight control over the actions of his caucus members. Normally loquacious Conservatives close up like oysters and dare not speak without their leader's approval. MPs are watched by Conservative staffers both inside and outside Parliament. Elected representatives are publicly called to order for deviating from the party line. Quote, everybody is being watched. What we say, what we do, who we talk to. We're told not to fraternize with MPs from the other parties, and that's not normal, end quote. Conservative Party source.
Okay. So here's some things here. What this article does in totality is it seems to be criticizing the party discipline that the Conservatives have. And it's criticizing the way Pierre Poilievre is maintaining that party discipline. Now let's just deal with this first part. So they are being monitored for what they say and they have to toe the party line. Well, when you're an opposition party and you're either trying to get ahead in the polls or trying to stay ahead in the polls, that's exactly what you need. And as the leader of a large party, you need to understand that every single one of those Conservative MPs that are part of your party are not going to be a liability.
Well, and a lot of this is just taking something, again, that's normal for the MPs, that's normal for the party, which is party discipline, and painting it in a way that makes it seem extreme. The CBC is trying to tell us in this article that Pierre is so strict with his caucus. Can you imagine what he's going to do with you, the citizens?
Right.
That's the narrative that they're trying to paint here. Meanwhile, most of the stuff that's happening is completely normal party discipline.
Well, and look at how this dovetails. So in their first few articles, they were trying to say that 17 Conservative MPs are very unhappy with Pierre Poilievre because they are now being restricted from writing letters of support and supporting their communities. And now they're going on to say that Pierre's caucus is really unhappy with him because of how strict the discipline is in the party. Well, here's the thing. Let's just clear the air here. Of the two parties, Liberals, Conservatives, there's only one of those parties that has had any member, publicly or privately, say that they do not support their leader. And there's only one party who has had 20 of them stand up at a caucus meeting and ask for the resignation of their leader. And there's only one party of the two of them that has had all of those people completely muted from talking to the press following that. Now, you may not like that you can't go and talk to who you want to, and you may not like that you can't go and say what you want to who you want. And the article references they were able to do that under Andrew Scheer and Aaron O'Toole. Well, let's go back to the election results of the party under Andrew Scheer and Aaron O'Toole. Oh, that's right. They lost.
Right. I mean, again, part of party discipline is that the party's principles and the party's policies need to come above your individual feelings on whatever subject. So, for example, the Conservatives Party, their stance on abortion is very, very blatantly obvious. It's that we, as a government, are not going to touch it. We're not concerned with it. We're not going to legislate it. We're going to leave it alone. You may have some MPs that are very pro-life. That's their personal opinion. But to be part of the party, they need to support that policy that they're not going to legislate abortion.
So they also mention not fraternizing with other parties. Well, here's the thing. Ladies and gentlemen, we're approaching an election. And as you get closer to an election, you want to be very careful as to what you say to MPs and other parties, because you have to assume that everything that you say is going to be used against you at some point.
Well, and I mean, there were even instances of the MPs fraternizing with other politicians, not necessarily from this country, and that was used against them. So, unfortunately, when you're a politician, your life is 100% public and it's open to scrutiny.
Conservative MPs' words and actions are closely scrutinized by the leader's office. Partisanship is encouraged. Fraternizing with elected officials from other parties is a no-no. Those who follow these rules are rewarded. Those who don't often have to suffer the consequences. Quote, "There are always multiple people in the penalty box. There is always somebody in trouble," end quote, one caucus member said. Quote, "You don't need to be told what to do. You watch the leader and understand what's expected from you," end quote, one conservative source said.
So throughout this article, nobody is named. It's just this source, that source, and that is sometimes permissible when you are trying to protect your sources. But also, it's very telling who they say said what. Like in this last paragraph that Ryan just read, it was someone from the Conservative caucus. Senators are also part of the Conservative caucus. It doesn't specify that it was an MP. And the other one said a conservative source. So what are conservative sources? I mean, is it a staffer? Is it a reporter? Like, it doesn't say.
Well, in the article, it actually says at some point, they've spoke to something like, I don't know what the number was, like 12 people or something like that, that was made up of, and it said MPs and stuff like that. But it then said party members. Well, I'm a party member.
Right, I was going to say, Ryan's a party member. I mean, the EDA president is a party member. The volunteers in our EDA are conservatives. You know what I mean? So it could really be anybody. And that's why I don't trust this article, is because they're not naming their sources. And it seems like they're trying to give weight to these sources. But we really don't know who they are. It could just be somebody in a local EDA. It could be a senator. Like, we don't know.
Well, and just take, for instance, that last quote. I'm not going to elaborate on it, but basically it said, you watch the leader and, you know what you're expected to do. We're going to come back to that.
Quote, "The leader comes first. Do not undercut him," end quote, said another. Radio Canada spoke with more than a dozen elected representatives, employees, and members of the Conservative Party of Canada from 3 different provinces. The sources were granted anonymity so they could express themselves freely. All reported a tightening of caucus discipline under Poilievre's leadership. Quote, "Since Pierre became leader, you can feel the difference," end quote, said a source in the Conservative leader's entourage. Quote, "MPs don't get too comfortable. They're careful," end quote. But some in the Conservative ranks are beginning to chafe at the restrictions.
So again, the article is trying to frame this as draconian restrictions and that people have to be, very careful and paranoid. No, you have to be careful to commit to what the party's vision is. That's the thing. And we've even talked about this and we referenced this. Whenever anybody seems to, take for granted where they are in the polls, they actually get clapped back. They get clapped and saying, listen, we have won 0 seats in the next election. Do not get complacent. You have no votes allocated to your riding in your name yet. So don't be acting like we've already won.
Well, and stay humble, right? That's another point. All of this just falls under normal party discipline. It's something that may be alien to us as voting citizens, but this is quite normal within a party. And this is exactly what the party was lacking under Aaron O'Toole and Andrew Scheer. This is why the Conservatives are so far ahead in the polls and have stayed as far ahead as they have for as long as they have.
Now, this isn't to throw shade at Andrew Scheer or Aaron O'Toole. Aaron O'Toole didn't have the right platform. I think we can all agree about that. But, under Andrew Scheer, it was a little different, and they led in the style that they wanted to. But it didn't win the election, and I think the party learned, and I think Pierre learned. He is operating much more similar to Stephen Harper than the other two. And here's the thing. Look what happens when a leader does not actually pay attention to what their members are doing. Look what's going on in the Liberal Party. You have all of these Liberals and all of these cabinet ministers thinking they're holier than thou, they can do no wrong, and they can go around, do whatever they want, break ethics rules, break the Conflict of Interest Act, and nothing's going to happen. So, yeah, Pierre doesn't want that type of cabinet, he doesn't want that type of party, and he doesn't want that type of government. That's why they're operating this way, because they're trying to get elected, and then they want to stay elected. But let's get back to probably the most important part of the article.
Poilievre imposes iron discipline on himself. He works hard, he works late. Quote, we've been telling him for months that he needs to take a vacation, but he just won't listen, end quote, one source said. Quote, he's the one who decides everything. His main advisor is himself. The people around him are only there to realize the leader's vision, end quote. Now that's just blatantly false. When the Conservatives have their biannual meeting, that's when they put in policies that the grassroots Conservatives, like people like you and me, want to be put in. Yeah. We've done a video about that with... it was with Derek Gladue. You can watch that interview, and he talks about how this process works.
Well, and they were able to actually enact one of the policy suggestions that they put forward, and they're really proud to do that from his writing. And there was over 2,000 people that actually showed up to the Conservative Convention to vote on these policies, and they debated them in sessions to come up with the policy charter for the Conservatives. So the fact that this article is trying to say, well, Pierre decides everything and no one can decide, I don't think so. I don't think so. Plus, you have people like Larry Brock, you have people like Melissa Lantsman, you have people like Michael Barrett, Michael Cooper, Kelly Block, Stephanie, you have all of these very strong MPs. I'm pretty sure Pierre is intelligent enough to take in that input. Now, at the same time, he has a vision for the party. Now, the vision is something that most likely will not deviate, because a vision is very simple. It's very focused. If it's very unfocused, you end up with an Aaron O'Toole type of campaign. But if it's very focused, A, it's easy to remember, and B, it's easy to ground all of your policies around. Now, it's where it gets to the individual policies and the different strategies. That's what's going to be up for debate, and that's what's going to be up for discussion to advise Pierre on what to do. So, yeah, I don't think that's the case, because here's the thing. You just have to look at how Pierre has structured his shadow cabinet. He has put extremely competent people into these different roles. Look what he's done with Larry Brock. He did not used to be justice minister, but
he is now. He's the shadow justice minister, and he will be the justice minister.
And how did that happen? Larry demonstrated how competent he was and what an asset he was. So Pierre rewarded him. He rewarded him by giving him that.
It's almost like the best people get the jobs that they're suited for.
Imagine that.
Right? Well, and the other part of this paragraph that I just have to laugh at is that Pierre works too hard. You know, he should take a vacation. What, so he could be like our prime minister who spends almost half his time vacationing and not, you know, working for Canadians? I don't think so.
Right. Like they're painting this as if it's wrong to set an example. And this is what Pierre is doing for his party. Don't take our word for it. Read the CBC article. He is saying, you work your ass off because Canadians are paying us. And that's what they deserve. And we need to be working our asses off until this Liberal government is out. And then it's a different type of work. And we cannot stop working. We are going 100% until we put Canada back the way it was before Justin Trudeau took over. So there's other examples in here about disciplining people allegedly, right? It's not for sure.
Well, and there's no source either, right? They're just saying, oh, well, it was a conservative source and we let them have anonymity. My guess is that these people were not permitted to speak. Again, it could have been somebody from the EDA. It could have been some low-level staffer. We don't know who these people are. And I mean, my guess is that they were not permitted to speak because they don't have the authority to speak.
Well, and they talk about a mysterious cabinet or committee chair change or in the status of women's committee and things like that. But here's the thing. The party leader sets the rules. If you don't agree with the rules, then maybe you shouldn't be in the party. That's the thing. And you're not going to agree with everything. This is what we say all the time. You are not going to agree with everything that a platform puts down, just like you're not going to agree with everything that the leader says. When I worked for people, I didn't agree with a lot of what they said. But guess what? They're the boss, and it's not a democracy in that relationship. So off you go.
When you're representing a political party, you have to put the party's platform above your own personal beliefs. Nobody's saying you can't have those personal beliefs or that you can't discuss them or bring them to the leader and say, I'm concerned because X, Y, Z. But when you're representing the party, you have to represent those beliefs and that platform. Otherwise, run as an independent.
Right. And this article even goes to say, well, if you don't say the slogans, then you're going to be punished or you're not going to be rewarded. Well, that's the party marketing.
This whole article is another hit piece on Pierre Poilievre and the Conservative Party, and the frequency with which these are being put out is just getting too convenient, if you know what I mean.
Yeah, this seems like look at this, right? You had the Rebel caucus approach Justin Trudeau, ticked off about what they have and have not been doing, called for him to resign. One of the promises that Trudeau allegedly made is they're going to be putting out a media campaign. Funny that shortly after that, you get all of these articles in sequential order from the CBC.
Right, and the CBC is trying to manufacture their own rebel caucus within the Conservative Party.
And it doesn't exist.
Right.
So I think we're going to continue to see these, and if they continue to pivot to different subjects, we will follow right along with that and make sure that you get the truth. And this isn't because, we are pro-Pierre. We are anti-disinformation. So, the fact that they just keep doing this, and the fact that they did this right before the Randy Boissonneau scandal has a really bad smell to it, folks. But what's going to smell nice is that building when it's empty of CBC.